Good evening, everyone, and welcome again. And it's great to see you. My name is Menussi, and this is going to be our weekly Soul of the Parsha class for Parashat Ki Tetze. So this Parsha is full of many topics, and I chose one very particular one, which I find very interesting, and if you go deep into it, can teach us a lot of things about human nature and about also current events. And this is a certain prohibition that appears in the second part out of the 7 parts of the parasha. The second part, which corresponds to tomorrow, Monday, has a particular prohibition which we wouldn't have believed this maybe a few years ago, but it has become extremely relevant to something that is now trending worldwide. And this is the prohibition to, simply put, to cross-dress. The prohibition for a man to put on a woman's clothing and for a woman to put on man's clothing. And so we'll read the verse. The verse in Hebrew is Lo yeh kli gever al isha velo yilbash gever simlat isha ki to'avat Hashem Elokecha kol oseh ele. And I'm translating. Literally, it means like this: there shall not be a man's apparel on a woman. This is how it's termed, that it shouldn't be on her. Nor shall a man wear woman's clothing. For whoever does these things is abhorrent to the Lord your God. This is the prohibition. So it was actually expanded over time with the different commentators. And it refers to any kind of behavior that is characteristic of the opposite gender. If you belong to one gender, you shouldn't do this. So the one main example is for a woman to carry a weapon, because making war, this is all in the context of warfare, because that's how the parsha starts. Ki Tetze is when you go out to battle in a war. So Kli Gever, what he was here translated as men's apparel, also means in Hebrew a man's tool. It could also be read as a man's clothing, but it can also be just any kind of tool. And many translators or interpreters say it has to do with carrying a weapon. Of course, we're not talking about something like self-defense. We're talking about something that has to do with being a soldier in battle. So this is something characteristic of men. Men have to be in the battle, and women shouldn't be soldiers. That's what it means, or carry weapons in this kind of way. And it was also expanded for men. So for example, for a man to shave his bodily hair or to dye his hair if he's getting white, if he has like 1 or 2 gray hairs, he shouldn't pull them out because this is considered something feminine, also to dye your hair. So all this is an expansion of this one verse, which is really 2 prohibitions, which are not to cross-dress, but again, when you expand it, it talks about assuming characteristic behaviors of the opposite gender. So this is very ancient and eternal, of course, it's part of the Torah, but something incredible happened in the past few decades. And what happened, which has made this incredibly relevant to our generation, is a phenomenon that's increasing in numbers and increasing in ratios, which is many men and women, especially in Western civilization, but we're in a globalized age, so it's everywhere, are claiming to having been born in the wrong body. They say, I feel this is the wrong body. My body is male or female, but my internal subjective experience, or the term that they're using now, is gender identity. My gender identity is something else. I'm actually a woman in a man's body or a man in a woman's body. And this is a cause of great misery, suffering for me. I can't bear it. I can't stand it. And then the notion comes about that maybe something that could possibly mitigate my suffering, if this is the situation that I'm encountering, and it's been called gender dysphoria. That's how they call it now, the technical term. Dysphoria is the opposite of euphoria. So euphoria, this is the assumption that most people, regular people, feel euphoric about their bodies. I'm not sure how much true this is, but the assumption, the underlying assumption is that the normal person feels euphoric about being a soul within a body. They feel that it goes together. I'm a man in a man's body. But for someone who has this condition, they call it gender dysphoria, because I feel the opposite of euphoria. I feel foreign and alien in my body. So they say maybe that what could change this if I start looking like the opposite gender. So they know that a few years ago, they called it sex change. They don't call this anymore. They have different names all the time. Now it's called gender reassignment. And the jargon is changing every few years. But the idea is that if I change the appearance of my body in as much as possible, and it starts with putting on the other gender's clothes, and also being referred to by the pronouns of the other person, which is also a kind of garment, you can say. If you're referred to as a she or a he, this is a kind of garment. This is a sort of an abstraction of the notion of clothing or garment or apparel. And so if you call me by a different pronoun and I put on and I change my name, and I put on a different clothing, and then of course you can go on. And going on means doing things that are more invasive and also many times irreversible, which one thing is hormonal therapy, taking the hormones of the other person. This is one of the things that, again, would have been undreamt of 100 years ago, but with modern medicine, modern technology, it has become a possibility. We have distilled the male-female hormones, right, estrogen and testosterone, and people can artificially take them, and it actually physically changes their body. It doesn't turn them from a man to a woman or the other way around, but it really does make it could grow hair on a woman's face, and it could grow breasts for a man and things like this. And you have to take it every day, all your life, because it's constantly, always unnatural for the body. The body would never start actually producing the opposite sex's hormones. So it's completely artificial, but it's quite radical in what it does. And of course, the final frontier and the most irreversible and the most radical, the most extreme, is doing all kinds of plastic surgery. So we know this, but what you may not know, many people know this, it depends on how much versed you are in contemporary lore of all these gender issues, is that this is growing in numbers. This is becoming more and more popular. And the numbers we're reaching now with the younger generation, I mean people who are under 20, who are now in high school or before, numbers are unbelievable. It's now more in Western cultures, Western industrialized states, we're talking about over 10% of people. So you have a class of 30 people, 3 at least, would now claim that they're gender non-conforming, or they're gender non-binary, or they have gender dysphoria, or they're gender queer, and you have all this. It's an ever-growing lexicon of new terms that they use in order to say, I don't fall into the classical binary categories of male and female. I know what my body is. Well, hopefully, some people maybe don't know what body they are, but usually they do. But they say, on the inside, it's something completely different. You can also be gender fluid. Gender fluid means that in the morning you feel one thing, and in the evening you feel another thing. And this is growing in numbers, and it's also reaching very disturbing new customs or actions that are being taken in order to accommodate this. And it's becoming extremely widespread also in the medical institutions. And what's becoming more and more the custom is to, in fear of hurting those people and maybe causing them to be depressed and to commit suicide and things like this, although usually the depression and the emotional issues begin before this, and this is part of this. But the fear is very great, and it's also increased by the way the media covers this. So what they're doing now is they're trying to accommodate this by giving And sometimes from a very, very early age, from a very young age, and we're talking 9 or 8 or 7 or 5, to give them hormones, starting with hormones that block their puberty. It's called puberty blockers. They stop them from, it's to slow down puberty in order to gain time, to buy time. And then at some point, when they're a bit older, to give them the opposite sex's hormones. And which again is, the younger you take it, the more irreversible it is. And this is becoming like a widespread craze. And it's trending, it's incredible. And the biggest magazines and the biggest, like National Geographic or Time magazine, they're celebrating this. They're seeing this as the new hallmark of being progressive, of being enlightened, is if you're accommodating and you're appreciating and you're giving room to this kind of different identities. And again, the most extreme thing is that it's going all the way to children. So this is a very, very extreme, radical thing that's increasing now in modern, mostly secular society, but it's like everything else, it's filtering into religious groups as well, Jewish, Christian, etc. So this is a big issue. And this is maybe even too short a class to cover this really. But what we want to do today is, because we have this verse in this week's parsha, we want to use this as an excuse to try and get to the bottom of this, or maybe to put it in a different way, to get not to the bottom of this, but to the height of this, to the higher end of this, to understand its spiritual root and where is this coming from. And so before we go into this, I want to connect this to the name of the parsha and the way Chassidut explains the name of the parsha. So the parsha begins with the verse, Ki Tetze lamilchama al oivecha. When you go out into war with your enemy. But if you look at the way it's phrased in Hebrew, it's not phrased when you go out to war with your enemy. The word in Hebrew is not with. The word in Hebrew is al oivecha, on or above your enemy. So this is a very, it doesn't, it's a very strange term to use. Why does the Torah say, when you go out to battle on your enemy? Even in Hebrew it's strange, not just in English. It should be with your enemy. So the Hasidic explanation is, well, like everything else, Hasidut makes everything, translates everything into the spiritual realm. So when Hasidut explains this verse, we're not talking about an actual physical war or battle. We're talking about a spiritual war. Spiritual war means both internally, my own higher nature facing my own lower animal, wicked or destructive nature. So this is one spiritual battle. And another spiritual battle is with whatever negative spiritual force or idea is spreading in the world. And I need to face it. It's not an actual battle. I don't want to kill anyone, God forbid. And I don't want to hurt anyone. I want to heal and improve people's lives. But there is a sort of battle or cultural war to be engaged in. And then the Hasidus asks, so what does it mean to wage this war, not with your enemy, but on your enemy? And then there are two amazing explanations that are given. So one explanation is that if you want to win this spiritual war, whether it's a war you're engaging with your own negative or lower nature, or with something else outside of you, you have to be above it. You have to rise above it. If you're intimidated by it, if you're disgusted by it, if you're if you feel that it's too big for you, you don't understand it, or you don't want to understand it, you're not going to win this battle in any way. You have to rise above it. You have to transcend. You have to transcend your lower nature. If you're mixed up with your own petty desires, your own fears and your own inhibitions, you can't, then they're in charge. They're leading you on. You can't lead them on. You can't be in this conflict and vanquish vanquish is the right word, to win this war. So you have to be above it. So that's one explanation. You have to rise above it. So in this case, we have to sort of contain this issue. We can't say it's just crazy and that's it. That's not being above it. That's being outside of it. It's not the same thing. Being above it means you see it through and through. You're not afraid of it. You're not disgusted by it. You simply see it for what it is, and and you get to the bottom of it. Like I said, you are trying to understand what it's really all about. So that's being above it. It's being sort of, you have to, it invites you to grow and be more mature and more high in the kind of phenomena that you encounter and understand it. It's an invitation for you to grow and understand and become deeper in the way you understand this particular phenomena. And the other, even deeper explanation for this strange word on your enemy, and this is even deeper, is that in order to win this war, if you're going out to this war, you not only have to transcend and be above this phenomenon, you have to raise it to its own spiritual root. You have to see it as it is above. Al oivecha means your oyev, your enemy, as it is up there, not as it is down here. It's spiritual root. And if you get to it, to the bottom of it, or like I said, not to the bottom of it, to the height of it, you raise it all the way to its spiritual source, there it's good. You see the good essence, the positive root from whence it's coming. And the idea is that everything in the world has a holy, sacred, positive root, even if descending into this world, it assumed a very negative form. It could assume a somewhat negative form. It could assume a very negative form. It could assume the most negative form. It doesn't matter. Because it says, Ein ra yored milemala. Nothing evil descends from above. Hashem made this world. Everything Hashem does is for the best. He definitely creates good things and bad things. We're not saying there's no good and evil or good and bad in the world. There is. We are saying that if you want to win a battle, but truly win it, not just say something forceful or impressive or convincing, that usually only convinces those who are already convinced, but doesn't convince someone who is more confused by this. If you want to win this war in a deep way, in a long-term way, you have to find its spiritual root where it's something positive. There is somewhere deep down, there is a very positive. They're looking for something real. They're looking for something good. They're trying to hold on to an element, a sliver of truth that is absolutely real. And if you don't find this, and you just create a border around it, and you segregate it, and you you quarantine it, and you're able to say this is the negative thing that we're not touching this because it's very negative, then you did something very important. You do have to quarantine something. And not quarantine, but I mean, delineate, where it's good and where it's bad and what's good and what's bad. But it's not going to be a long-term solution. The long-term solution has to be to find the holy spark within it. So that's what we really want to do. And I just want to add one more thing to this introduction that became quite long, which is there is an amazing, one of the deepest, most radical ideas brought forth in the Talmud. It was brought on by Resh Lakish. Resh Lakish was one of the greatest Amoraim, one of the greatest sages, and he was a Baal Tshuva. He was, for many years, outside of Jewish living and Jewish wisdom and study, and then he became a Baal Tshuva. So he has some very intense remarks about what it means to do tshuva, to return to God after having sinned and having done wrongdoings. And then he says something amazing. He says, and this really connects to this parasha's name, which again guides us going into this very intense issue. He says that when you do tshuva out of love, he's talking about tshuva out of fear and tshuva out of love. So he says when you're doing tshuva out of fear, we'll start with this. When you're doing tshuva out of fear, you can get to the point that your intentional sins will be counted as unwitting sins, as unwitting transgressions, right? You can get to the point that you mitigate whatever you did, and it's counted above in the supreme heavenly court. It's counted as if you didn't do it on purpose. You did do it on purpose when you did it, but it's counted as if you did it unintentionally, because you rectify yourself to the point that if you would now go back in time, you wouldn't do it. So it's considered unintentional. However, if you do tshuva out of love, which is a deeper kind, more authentic kind of tshuva, you can get to the point, and this is very radical, you can get to the point that your intentional sins are counted as merits, as good things, as good deeds. And this is crazy. How can this be? Someone deliberately sinned. He knew it was wrong, and he did it despite knowing this. And after he did this, and then he does tshuva out of love, it's now counted as if he did something good. So the explanation goes that when you do tshuva out of love, you love your own soul so much, you get to the bottom of your own soul, and you see that in the deepest, most essential element of your soul, even when it sinned, it really wanted to do something good. It didn't know how to do it. It didn't know how to define even good or bad, maybe. But he wanted, because your soul is ultimately very good. It's precious. It's without sin. And if your soul is pure, it obviously wanted to do good even when it sinned. And when you do tshuva out of love, you can get to that point in your soul, to that root that wanted to do good, and you can see that this was your true, maybe not your conscious intention, but it was your soul's intention. And therefore, when you raise that sin to that point, and you see that your soul meant it for it to be for the best, for something to be something good, then it really does become a merit, right? So this really goes beautifully with this Hasidic explanation for the name of this parsha. So now going back to this issue. So just to understand the transgression, the Torah's transgression. So the most common explanation, but also the least one relevant to our generation, is that the reason that the Torah prohibits for a man to put on women's clothing and vice versa is in order not to create situations of adultery. So a man could put on a woman's clothing so he can mix with the woman, and then he could commit adultery with one of the women. Or vice versa. If a woman wants to commit adultery with a man, she puts on a man's clothing to go to where the men are, something like this. And maybe there is something to this. In some situations, obviously there is. But that's the simplest explanation. It's not maybe the deepest one. It's very simple. It's very straightforward. And it becomes something that is really subservient to another prohibition, which is adultery. It becomes like a part of adultery. Then, as we go deeper, some more explanations are added. So Maimonides says, it's not just that. It's also part of avodah zarah, of idolatry, the prohibition of idolatry, because in many idolatrous groups, in many pagan societies, they used to do this. And sometimes even in weddings, the bride, as part of the wedding celebration, the bride would put on the groom's clothing and the other way around. It was maybe part of the way they made fun in the wedding. And the way it was done, and Jews have a tendency to mimic whatever is customary around them, so it's prohibited because you shouldn't do what idol worshippers do. So this goes a little bit deeper because it puts in the element of something wider than just adultery, which is idol worship, which is really a cultural issue. There are different cultures and trends and ideas that are common in groups that are not focused on serving God and making this world God's world. And you shouldn't mix with this because it's going in the opposite direction of making this world God's world. So it's a little bit deeper. And then going even more deeper, we get to Recanati. He was an Italian Kabbalist in Middle Ages. And he adds something else. He says it's not just adultery, and it's not just because it's customary among idol worshiping groups. It's also because it changes the way God created the world. God created the world for there to be men and women, and this is something to cherish and celebrate and understand, and also to deeply identify with. If I was put in a male body, regardless of what I feel on the outside, I have to look at my body and say, okay, so this is how God, there's no accident. There's no such thing as being born in the wrong body, even if that's how I feel. And what I need to do is I need to realize that this is God's will for me, at least in this incarnation, in this life. And you don't, in Hebrew, it's called leshanot sidrei bereshit. You don't change the orders of Genesis, the orders of creation. That's how the world is created. It's created for a reason. And if you're created a man or a woman, there are some extremely rare cases of what was previously known as hermaphrodites, and now it is known as intersex. And in Chazal's term, they called it androgynous. But that's that we're not talking about this. This is a very rare genetic condition, which the halakha, Jewish law, actually completely acknowledges and has completely acknowledged from the very beginning. That there are rare genetic cases and they shouldn't be defined as male or female, which, by the way, for many years, the medical institutions tried to turn intersex people into either male or female, something that Jewish law has always prohibited. They should always have been considered as their own thing. But then that's something genetic and and extremely rare, and we're not talking about this. We're talking about people being either male or female very clearly, because it is binary. And Rekanati says you have to accept that this is how you were created. So this is even deeper. And then you have something a little bit more interesting added later on by Abarbanel, another Italian commentator. And he said something very interesting. He added something. He spoke about men trying to cross-dress as women or try to be women. It's really incredible, by the way, that all through these years, people have acknowledged it's always happened that people try to do this or talk. It's just that now it's trending in a way in percentages that are unprecedented, that you have so many people. And this is clearly an idea that's becoming sort of viral. It's becoming sort of, you become somehow more interesting or more special. It's a way to express yourself. If you say in your classroom that I'm gender non-binary, or I'm gender queer, you can't categorize me. It's a kind of thing that adolescents like to do, and this is one of their way of doing this now. But it has always been around. So anyway, Abarbanel had something else, and he says that, and this is again very interesting and very deep. He says obviously no woman is expected to carry heavy loads, physical heavy loads, to do the heavy work, to do the hard work. And in every house you have this, the heavy things. Nobody expects the woman to carry them. You call the men, and they lift the cupboard or whatever it is. And he says if a man is trying to be a woman, he's really trying to get away from doing this hard work. And it's unfair for the other men. And it's unfair for him to shake off this kind of duty. And so this really adds another very interesting element, which is that that maybe this whole thing is escaping the duties of your gender. That there's something intimidating about being who I am. So for men, it's intimidating to be expected to be stronger and maybe more stable and maybe more to initiate things and to lead. And if you're very passive and if you're very intimidated by life in general, then you're intimidated by being masculine. And maybe also for women, if women in our generation are objectified or are seen as something that are victims of violence, it's constantly talked about. Well, it does exist, as we know, but it's the way sometimes it's stressed so much so that women say, well, I'd rather just be a man. I'd rather escape the issues. I don't want to be looked at by men in a certain way. I don't want to be objectified. I don't want to be courted in a way that I feel doesn't appreciate who I am. So it's escaping what's expected of you as belonging to your own gender, your own sex. By the way, the people who are into this, they totally differentiate the word sex from the word gender. Originally, the word gender came about because it seemed very impolite, even in a form, to ask people what sex are they, because the word sex brings about so many associations. So they use the word gender. But for the LGBT community and all this, it has been completely differentiated. Sex is your bodily sex, and gender is what you feel on the inside, and the expectations and notions and all this. And but of course, I think it's wrong to do this. It's really, it goes together, and gender is just as binary ultimately as sex, because you have two genders. Even if you're talking about new kinds of genders, it's different combinations of the two basic genders. Okay, so now we have to get to, as I said, to the bottom of this, or to the height of this, and understand what is the holy spark? What is the good thing? Where is this all coming from? We can call it crazy, we can call it childish, we can call it narcissistic. You can say it's a new mass delusion, maybe like the new emperor's clothes, that people are convincing themselves that there's no such thing as a man and a woman, and it's all up to what you feel on the inside. We can call it many names, but it doesn't help us understand the deeper aspects of it. So if we want to get to a deeper understanding, we have to remind ourselves of a very important Kabbalistic Hasidic notion, which is called inter-inclusion. Inter-inclusion is the concept that if when you have two opposites or two different concepts, and you want to expand them and make them become more mature and more sophisticated, and you want to be more mature and more sophisticated in the way you understand them, you need to inter-include them, or appreciate the fact that they already inter-include in some way. What do I mean inter-include? Is that element X contains in some way, and that, let's say, entity X contains an element of entity Y, and entity Y contains an element of entity X. Because everything in life nothing is black and white. Black and white exists in an ideological space, maybe in the Platonic world of ideas, in the world of formation, as we call it in Kabbalah, but not in this world, in the world of action, the world of facts, and the world of gray areas. In the world of gray areas, every black has something white about it, every white has something black about it, and connecting this to our topic, every man has feminine aspects, or as sexology calls it, gender atypical aspects. Every man, you can't find a man without some property, some quality that's feminine-like. It's impossible. And every woman has something, some element, some aspect, some property, characteristic that's typically masculine and not typically feminine. And that's the way it is, that's the way it should be. It's absolutely normal. It doesn't create a spectrum. It just means that it's more like, a better notion would be not a spectrum, but a mosaic. That every person is a mosaic of masculine and feminine characteristics. But of course, he's embodied, every individual, in a body that's either male or female. You have the binary level, which is the level of the body, and in the level of the personality and the subjective world, then it becomes a little bit of a mosaic. And also, even there, it's not a complete, symmetrical mosaic or with equal pieces. If you're born in a male body, 99% chances that the mosaic will have a masculine, it would be overall masculine, but there would be some feminine elements and vice versa. Now, the idea of inter-inclusion is very important because it has to do with growth and progress and maturity. The idea is that a childish society and a childish personality does not acknowledge inter-inclusion. This is called a chaotic stage of a culture. The chaotic stage of a culture is when people think in stereotypical terms, and they think in black and white terms, and they think in a way that if you have one notion, it shouldn't inter-include, because if it inter-includes, it somehow takes away from its being what it is, what it should be. And this is called a chaotic stage, not because it's chaotic. It's not, if you can even say it's overly orderly. It's chaotic in the sense that if people are so stubborn and they so stubbornly hold on to these stereotypes and then they start fighting each other, you end up with chaos. This is the idea. This is why it's called a chaotic stage of civilization. It's not chaotic. It's very orderly. It's very, very clear cut. You delineate very clearly. If you're a man, you have to be masculine. And if you have a feminine characteristic, that's very bad. You shouldn't have a feminine characteristic because then it takes away somehow from your masculinity. This is called chaotic, childish, stereotypical thinking. And this causes chaos because it breaks the vessels. This is how it's called. It breaks the vessels because it's too simplistic. And life needs more flexibility than that. And life needs to contain people who aren't stereotypical, who aren't so typical. They're not divided clearly into types. It doesn't give room to individuality. It doesn't give room to creativity. It doesn't give room to evolving and discovering your unique internal mosaic. So this is pre-inter-inclusion. Pre-inter-inclusion is a stereotypically minded society. It's called chaotic because you hold on to it so simplistically, you end up people clashing, and then the vessels break, and the lights disappear, and people get lost, and people get neglected, and people feel that they're not appreciated if they don't fall into these stereotypical categories. And then advancing from what is called a chaotic stage, the chaotic stage, to the rectified stage, right? From tohu to tikkun, chaos and rectification, two basic terms. The core notion of advancing from the chaotic to the rectified stage has to do with inter-inclusion. Inter-inclusion means appreciating the fact that these stereotypes only exist in a ideological world of ideas, abstract notion sphere. They're very important, but that's where they exist. And individuals in this world are inter-included to begin with in some way. And not only that, but they should work on their inter-inclusion. And in fact, the whole purpose of marriage, from a Hasidic point of view, is for a man to get to know slowly how a woman experiences the world and how she perceives the world. And they do this by marrying and having a lot of conversations and having a lot of misunderstandings that they then work on turning that into re-understandings, into understanding each other better. And it's a lifelong journey, it's a lifelong process. But what happens through this work of marriage is that the husband has a greater appreciation of a way a woman thinks to the limited degree that he can, being a man, and vice versa. She can gradually understand what it means to be a man, and then they cross-fertilize each other. And they awaken the positive, the complementary element. The woman awakens a pre-existing feminine element within the man and actualizes it, turns it from a potentiality to an actuality, and the same goes the other way around. The man awakens and evokes and actualizes the potential, the hidden latent masculine element within the woman, which was there all along and maybe has already awakened before the marriage. But the way the marriage works, if it's a good marriage and you work on your marriage, and generally with the feminine voice coming into play, and women writing books and teaching and being prime ministers and all this, we have a stronger and stronger engagement and dialogue between the male and female experiences. And all this is part of culture as a whole and humanity as a whole growing up, advancing, progressing from a chaotic, stereotypically minded culture to a rectified, inter-included, balanced, more dialogical or dialogue-based society rather than monologue-based, right? Rather than having like two deaf people trying to speak and not hearing each other out because each one is carrying on their own monologue, ignoring the other person. This is the chaotic stage. So the fact that you have this sheds completely new light on what's going on today. And it enables us to suggest the following explanation for the whole gender bender, gender confused, gender questioning, gender queer, and all this culture that's developing around us today, and sort of see it in a more favorable eye. Again, it's very negative in the way it comes about because it brings about a lot of confusion, very unnecessary confusion, as we'll see in a minute, and also could actually cause a lot of actual irreversible harm to young children. But if we want to get to the root of it, we can see it in a favorable eye, what is called limud zchut, to try and see it favorably, which is a big mitzvah, to see everything, every person, through a favorable good eye. We can suggest the following explanation. Contemporary society feels in its bones, feels intuitively, intuits, that the time is ripe for society to advance from the more chaotic stereotypical stage to the more advanced inter-included rectified stage. That the time has come to let go of stereotypes and to create this kind of inter-included mosaic, to let the feminine within the masculine, to give this element room, and to give the feminine element within the masculine room, and to give room to the individuals with their own different expressions, to give this room to rebel against the stereotypes that are giving people who aren't stereotypical, and that's really many, many people, to not have them feel guilty or ashamed about being a little different. And so this is the good thing, that they may be moving them. When you're trying to do what the Parsha's name is asking us to do, which is, again, to rise above, to transcend the problem, and to see this cultural war enemy, right? Because ostensibly we're in a cultural war. Why do I have this? We're in a cultural war with this agenda. But if we want to be above this, or to raise it to its highest root, we need to find this good element. So this good element is an innate subconscious or superconscious desire to reach a situation that ultimately should be more rectified, not less rectified, in the sense that it inter-includes the masculine and the feminine. What does it get wrong? Why do we start out and we have forever the prohibition in this week's parsha for a man not just to take on hormones or to do surgery, which actually existed in ancient times also, but even to just cross-dress, even to just put on the other person's clothing, which is not invasive and it is absolutely reversible. Why does the Torah prohibit even this? And then kal v'chomer, you can infer from this that the more radical extremes are even more prohibited. Why does the Torah tell this? Give us this prohibition. So the explanation would be that if you want to advance from the chaotic stage to the rectified stage, you have to do this very carefully and slowly and one step at a time. And the idea is, what the Torah is really reminding us, is that inter-inclusion is actually based and built on the binary stereotypical level. The binary stereotypical, which we called chaotic level, is not there by accident. It's there because it's a vital stage. It's a vital stage because it reminds us of the biological truth of our nature. We are masculine or feminine. We're male or female. Male and female, he created them. We're embodied in a body that's either male or female, unless you have this rare genetic condition, which is outside of our sphere of discussion. So you're born into this, and this is part of your full being. And even when you want to talk about gender combinations and gender mosaics and gender, gender variants, you have to admit the fact that you're first thinking in binary terms, because gender is binary, because it has to do with the sex. Even if someone is atypical, if a boy likes to play with dolls, it doesn't blur the binary, it strengthens the binary. It says that this is a typically female behavior, but you have a boy who could do this sometime. And that's perfectly okay, because again, we're all inter-included. But the idea is the binary is there. Even if you're inventing 70 new genders, and this is what happened actually in Facebook suggested for a new user, you can be one of 72 genders. All these genders are combinations. They're either both in some way genders or they're neither, but the binary is completely in the background. The binary is that's the building blocks of our language and of reality itself, biological reality. And you can't ignore this, you can't skip this, you can't bounce over this, and you can't pretend it isn't there. And you can't change the language and now say you redefine man and women and say that a man is no longer a human being, a male human being, and a woman is no longer a female human being. It is now whatever your subjective experience is. You can't do this because you're running away from physical reality. You have to acknowledge physical reality. This is what the Torah is telling us. When it's telling us you can't cross-dress, because cross-dressing or pretending to be the opposite gender blurs the basic level, which is the level of bodies and the level of facts and the level of reality that you need to be anchored in. You can, if you anchor yourself to the subjective world of subjective experience, you're anchoring yourself to an unstable, unobservable, unobjective world that this would lead to just another kind of chaos, a worse kind of chaos. The chaos would be that you can define a man or a woman, and ultimately you wouldn't be able to define anything because it would all depend on someone's testimony of his subjective experience. You can't anchor a language to something so dynamic, so elusive, so subjective, so unempirical as the human subjective experience. You have to anchor language and society and your own understanding of yourself to something that's objective and unchanging and unchosen, which is your body. And this is a level that's extremely important. Again, it anchors you. If you're unanchored, you get lost in sea. What is the sea? The sea is the sea of subjective experiences and delusions and imaginations and ideas and ever-increasing subtleties of being this kind of gender and the other kind of gender, and maybe even not only questioning your gender, questioning your age and your species and whatever it is. You can imagine yourself to be an infinite amount of things, because spiritually and in your world, in the realm of subjective experience, everything is possible. You can dream up new identities for yourself every hour, but you have to anchor yourself to something absolutely real. And here I'd like to use a metaphor, which is very, very, I think is very powerful. And if anyone here has ever painted, and even if you haven't, but you've come across watercolor, you can appreciate this metaphor, which is, I think, is extremely helpful understanding this. Colors become interesting when you mix them. If you're using primary colors, it's very boring. If you just have blue and red and yellow, it's very boring. Interesting colors come about when you start mixing colors. However, if you're using watercolor and you rush the mixing of the colors, so you put a little bit of red, and then immediately you put a little bit of yellow, then, well, first it could be orange, which is very nice. But if you try mixing them in a way too rapidly before the color dries, what happens very quickly is that you don't have an interesting integration and combination of colors. It becomes all muddy and you have no color whatsoever. And if you want to create interesting combinations and layers of color, you need to put on one color and let it dry. By letting it dry, you're letting the color be what it is. And once it's dry, it's solidified into its own color. And then when you add another stroke of a brush stroke with a different color, then they create a very interesting combination. And you can see the first two colors, and you can also see them coming together to create a third color. And it's either waiting in time for the color to dry or creating a little bit of space between the two brush strokes. Either way, you have to differentiate, whether in space by creating a little bit of a thread of dry paper, or you wait in time for one color to dry and you put in the other color. And the idea is that if you want to inter-include within your personality a characteristic of the opposite gender, and you should do this, and this is what marriage and growth is all about. You should do this first. You have to appreciate and acknowledge and strengthen your bond and your connection to your own, to the sex that you were born into. You have to appreciate this and connect to this. And you say, if I was born a man, maybe I'm intimidated by this. Maybe I wish I could be a woman. A woman is more allowed to be more sensitive, maybe is allowed to cry, maybe shouldn't do the hard work. And if I categorize myself as feminine, I run away from my masculinity. But this is running away. I shouldn't run away from my physical identity. It anchors me in reality. It anchors me in what I was, in what I am physically in this world, in this lifetime. And then once I stop running away from this and I appreciate this, then it solidifies, the color dries, and now I can add another color. And it doesn't become muddy. It doesn't become just brown, which is genderless. It becomes something more interested. I'm a man, but I have a very strong feminine side also. I'm a woman, but I have a very powerful, a very developed masculine side also. And that's amazing. That's how we should all be. So this is, I think, a great metaphor. So one explanation for why the Torah is stressing so clearly that don't go down this path of cross-dressing and adopting other pronouns and pretending to be the opposite sex. And kal v'chomer, we can infer from this that you shouldn't go even further and try and be more similar to the other person's sex. God forbid, don't even try this. It means, ultimately, it means mutilating your body. That's the biggest kind of running away there is. It's not saying we want you to be stereotypical. It's saying we want you to gradually develop from a chaotic, simplistic, stereotypically minded stage to a rectified, mature stage, which is not stereotypical, in which every man has a feminine side or sides, and every woman has masculine sides. But we want you to do this in a way that doesn't leap over, that doesn't jump over the identification and appreciation of the body you were born into. And so we need, it's like submission, separation, and sweetening. The submission is accepting the fact that I may not like it, but I was born into this sex and I have to accept this. And then the separation would be separating your imagination and your desire and your feeling from your reality and accepting your reality and realizing this is what my soul ultimately wanted if it was born into this body. God and the soul agreed that I should be sent into this body. And sweetening is when I'm able to, after having come to terms with the sex that I was born into, I can include the feminine aspect within the overall masculine nature that I've, again, come to terms with. So this is the first level. And now the final point, the final element that I want to add to this whole structure is that the Kabbalah tells us that it's even deeper than that. It's not just that accepting my physical sex is a crucial stage in the way to becoming this inter-included mosaic that includes also the opposite sex's characteristics. But it's in the deepest way, it's even more meaningful than this mosaic that I build internally. What do I mean by this? Kabbalah talks about vessels and lights. Vessels is the more physical, or the something that's more connected to this world, and it contains the lights. The lights are the more spiritual, the more subjective experience. Very simply put, a body is a vessel and the soul is a light, but vessel and light are more abstract than this, because this one level of the soul, which is light, is the vessel for a higher level of the soul, and the higher level of the soul, which is considered a light compared to the lower level, is a vessel for the higher level, and so on. So vessels and lights are are relative notions, and everything is also is both a vessel and a light. But the idea is this: you can say, well, my body is the vessel and my soul is the light. So what's more important? The light, right? The vessel is just a vessel. That's how people think. So if people say, well, I feel that I'm a woman, or I feel that my feminine side is stronger than my masculine sides, and the vessel is, well, it's a wrong vessel, or it's a vessel that doesn't convey my subjective experience. So maybe if I change the way the vessel looks, because the light is more important than the vessel, right? So it appears to be that the light is more important than the vessel. But here comes this amazing, very deep, and that's really the most important thing I have to add to this whole idea, comes the idea that Kabbalah says that it's true that the light is higher than the vessel, but the root of the vessel is higher than the root of the light. When you elevate things up to the root, there's something about the vessel that's higher than the light. So a very simple example, if you have an idea for a book, and the idea is amazing, but it's just a light, writing the book, giving a vessel to this light, making this an actual book, materializing the notion of the book into an actual book, what you did is stronger and more powerful and higher, and it's rooted in something higher than the idea of the book. Even if ultimately the book that you wrote is only a pale shadow of the idea you had in your head. Your idea was amazing, and the book was what you were able to do. It's never perfect. Even an imperfect book is better than a perfect unwritten book. Why? Because the root of the vessel is higher than the root of the light. So a light is higher than a book. A light is the idea of the book. An unwritten book is perfect. The written book is imperfect. So the higher book is better. The virtual spiritual book is better than the actual written imperfect book. But still the imperfect book is better. It's better that you write an imperfect book than if you don't write a book at all. The root of the vessel is higher than the light. So the idea goes like for the body and the soul as well. Your soul is very deep and very complex and very complicated. It has very multi-layered and multi-dimensional, has a lot of different aspects to it. But ultimately, it was placed, this whole very complex mosaic was placed in a body that's very, very binary. It's either male or female. And you may feel that this narrows down your personality. And by the way, this goes not just for gender. I can say that I feel that I have so many different people on the inside, but on the outside, I have this one particular nose, one particular pair of ears, and one particular, color of my hair, and shape of my body, and that's it. And it narrows me down. But the idea is that this particular vessel that you were given, accepting it, coming to terms with it, being inside it, not trying to run away from it and reinvent yourself every week with a different hair color, or with trying to put on the outside the infinite nature of your inside, that's the key to giving your light to the world. The idea is that even if on the inside you're both male and female, and you have a feminine side and a masculine side, and all this, if I was placed in a body that's male, that's davka, in particular male, in this lifetime, this fact is telling me something deeper about myself than the highest of subjective spiritual experiences I can have about myself. Why? Because it's something I didn't choose and I don't identify with. The objectivity of the body, the fact that it's just there and I didn't choose it, and it's very particular, it's only male, and it's only a particular height, and it's only a particular size, and only a particular hair color and eye color. This particularity is telling, and I was only born in a particular country, and I have a particular mother tongue, and to particular parents in a particular time. And I didn't choose any of this, but this is part of the vessel that I was given. And coming to terms with this objective reality of my life, there's something higher and more amazing, and that more connects me to my shlichut, to my mission in life, than my own subjective experience. So the idea is that it's not just that accepting the sex I was born into and not trying to pretend to be the opposite sex. It's not just because this is a stage for me to develop and then include characteristics of the opposite sex or gender. It's even deeper than that. It means that I need to realize that my body and the sex I'm in is telling me something about the root of my soul. Below the root of my soul, I'm a mosaic of different characteristics. But the fact that this complicated mosaic was placed in a body that's either male or female is telling me something, is giving me a message about that ultimately in the highest level of my soul, I am connected to being this particular gender, this particular sex, male or female. And really what I am in the end is a combination of this variety of characteristics I have in my heart, in my head, with this particular mission. So let's say I'm a very feminine man. So I'm very feminine. This is in the level of lights, I feel all these parts of me. But the fact that I was placed in a masculine body tells me that my mission here is to spread this consciousness to men, to people, to show men that they can develop their feminine side. The same goes for a woman with a masculine side. She has this not so because she ignores the fact that she's a woman, but she needs to realize that her mission, her work in this world, in this lifetime, maybe the next lifetime she will be a man, but in this lifetime she's a woman. This is her job, to spread the ideas that she can see the world a little bit through masculine eyes. She needs to explain it in a way that it's a woman saying these things. And coming to terms with it is not just a stage on the way to something more advanced or more complex. It reflects something even higher than this psychological complex of your personality. It reflects something about the truest essence, the deepest essence of who you are. So this is the idea of the root of the vessels is higher than the root of the lights. So this is our meditation and our learning for this week. We took the one verse from this week's parsha, which talks about prohibiting men to put on women's clothing and prohibiting women from wearing men's clothing. And we try to analyze it in a way that connects it to what's going on today. And hopefully it gives us a better understanding, a deeper understanding of what's going on. It's still a very long way from trying to help people dealing with these kind of feelings and experiences and answering them and trying to advance. This is, we need a lot more time for this and a lot more work for this. But I really hope that it would help you shed some more light on what's going on today and on a deeper understanding of this parsha as well. So that's it for tonight.